A Portuguese archaeologist just discovered a bunch of sunken ships filled with gold, including a Spanish galleon with 22 tons of gold and silver. This much gold today is worth about $2 billion, and this is the money from one ship alone. Archaeologist Alexandre Monteiro made this discovery almost by accident. He was studying some documents when he found some information about a ship that went missing in 1615, and he decided he wanted to find it. After many years, Alexandre found not just this specific ship, he actually discovered 8,620 shipwrecks in the waters of Portugal alone. Out of this number, 250 are gold-filled shipwrecks, a discovery that would make any Jack Sparrow shake in his boots. Most of these ships went down for boring reasons like the weather, but sometimes they were destroyed in battles, which may or may not have been super epic. They were carrying gold and other treasures from the New World to Europe, and of course, everyone wanted a share. Alexandre had been studying historical shipwrecks for 30 years now, so he has discovered many ships that went down in somewhat glorious ways. In 1816, for example, a ship of one of the richest men in Portugal sank in Australia, with an insane amount of 66,000 silver coins. This was the first ship from Portugal to ever plunge in the waters of Australia. The bad news is that these ancient sunken vessels, filled with riches and epic stories, are not so easy to reach. They're deep down in the ocean and covered by sand. You could still try, but that would be stealing part of a country's history, and you wouldn't want to be that person, would you? Naturally, Portugal was not the only country that explored the seas back then. The coast of Europe is packed with sunken ships filled with gold. In fact, there are about 1 million historical shipwrecks underwater right now, and the treasures abandoned under the sea might be worth around $60 billion. It's an insane amount of money, but let me tell you that these gold-filled sunken ships aren't really worth the hassle. There are many stories of maritime treasure discoveries that turned into insane lawsuits and even long jail time. Our first story starts in 1746, when a violent storm crashed a ship called Prince de Conti near an island in Brittany. The ship was filled with tea, ceramics, and 100 gold ingots. Of course, the owners of the ship tried to save the loot, but if it's not easy now, imagine how it was back in the 18th century. It took more than 200 years for the vessel to be found. It finally happened in 1975, when a group of French men discovered it and decided to take pretty much every valuable thing they could find. Now, I said these things were not worth the trouble for a reason. In France, if you find anything that can be historical, you must declare it to the local authorities within 48 hours. Fail to comply, and you will be committing something known as a crime. To be fair, our French friends here did declare their findings, but only the corroded cannons from the ship. And the gold? Well, they sold it. Obviously, because each gold bar is worth between $125,000 to $231,000. It took French authorities almost 50 years to retrieve the stolen gold, and they didn't retrieve all of it. Part of it was bought by an elderly couple living in Florida, and the crime is so serious they were charged for connection with money laundering, organized crime, and the trafficking of cultural goods. The poachers also sold some gold ingots to the British Museum collection. Now, let's go back to the 1850s, when a steamer called SS Central America traveled from Panama to California and back again. This was during the Californian Gold Rush, a time when 300,000 people moved to California to dig for gold. Because the travel route was not easy breezy, people needed to carry their gold around on big ships. This is where our friend SS Central America comes in. In 1857, the ship had 578 people on board and about 10 tons of gold. Very few survived, and around $100 to $150 million in gold went down with the ship. All of this explains why in 1988, a group of investors from Columbus decided to finance a research project to find this ship. The research was led by a guy named Tommy Thompson, Tommy was really crazy about the idea of finding this sunken ship filled with gold. It took him years to find the exact location of the SS Central America, especially because the ship was 7,500 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, and retrieving it required a lot of fancy tech. A group of 161 investors paid for his adventure, but it goes without saying that they were not doing this out of love from their hearts. They invested $12.5 million in this project because they were expecting to earn at least 10 times more. But since life is not all sunshine and rainbows, 39 insurance companies sued the research team as soon as they retrieved the gold. Back when the ship was up and running, these companies insured the cargo of the SS Central America, and when the cargo was finally retrieved, more than 100 years later, they wanted to be compensated. They said it was not their job to retrieve it, but that doesn't mean they abandoned it. This crazy talk didn't stick, and 92% of the gold was given to the research team. The plot thickened when the investors were scammed by none other than Tommy Thompson, who fled with $4.16 million. He also had 500 gold coins, but he's not telling a soul where they are. Nonsense like this is the reason why most countries have rules to protect cultural properties. And yes, sometimes shipwrecks can be a cultural property. Obviously, there are many maritime treasure discoveries that happen without breaking any laws. The SS City of Cairo, for example, was a steamship that submerged in 1929 with 2,000 boxes of silver coins weighing 122 tons. A company called Deep Ocean Search retrieved the coins from a depth of 17,000 feet, which is 4,500 feet lower than the Titanic. 34 million pounds went to the UK Treasury, and the Deep Ocean Search also got a share. The good news here is that some of the coins can be bought by collectors, legally. Paying for a treasure is probably the closest you can get to an underwater archaeology find. I know, all I did was destroy your piracy dreams. But while raiding gold-filled shipwrecks may be a crime in most countries, or just financially impossible for us mere mortals, not all hope is lost. There is about $771 trillion worth of gold lying on the ocean floor, and it doesn't have an owner. It's like an underwater gold mine, except the gold is in the water. You know how the water of the ocean is salty? Well, the gold gets mixed with the minerals in the water, so it's not like you stumble upon a gold nugget on the beach. Each liter of ocean water has 13 billionths of a gram of gold, and it's very difficult to extract such tiny particles of gold from the water. But that doesn't mean people haven't tried, and of course, there's been a scam here too. In the 1890s, a guy claimed he had invented a thing that would suck gold from the seawater. When he got enough money, he fled the country with the cash. If you really want to get some gold, you could try to extract it from the Earth's core, which has 1.6 quadrillion tons of gold. There's 16 times more gold in the Earth's core than what humans have mined in the whole of history. No hoax involved here, because nobody has dared to go down there yet. With archaeologists discovering gold-filled sunken ships out and about, maybe we can make our own maritime treasure discoveries, or at least save enough money to buy some silver coins. A ship filled with gold and other treasures worth over $13 million was found in the middle of the Namibian desert after almost 500 years. The worker who found it was actually looking for diamonds, but ended up with something way more valuable for history. There were some blocks of copper, some wood, pipes, and elephant tusks. The miners called for an archaeologist, who soon realized it wasn't a disturbed beach like they thought, but a shipwreck. All evidence showed that it was a Portuguese trading vessel, Bom Jesus, that went missing in the 16th century. Experts believe it was a special kind of ship that was bigger, stronger, and better than older ships from Portugal and Spain. These ships were built to take Portuguese explorers on long trips to distant places like India, China, and Japan, and come back with tons of cargo. The Bom Jesus was likely carrying treasures from Lisbon, Portugal, to western India. But it looks like on its way around the southern tip of Africa, near Namibia, a big storm pushed the ship too close to the shore. The ship hit a rock, tipped over, and broke apart, sinking into the ocean. Archaeologists found treasure from the captain's chest under the water, which probably fell out when the ship's wooden hull broke. They also found pieces of the ship scattered along the shore, likely from the violent storm and later by construction in the area. The storm must have been very fierce, but they didn't find many bones, which means most of the crew may have survived or were lost at sea. The ship was split into 3 sections and incredibly well preserved, thanks to the thick layers of sand that covered it and prevented rot. Archaeologists who studied the wreck discovered over 40 tons of cargo. There were cannons, swords, blocks of metal like lead and tin, fabrics, and tools that sailors used to navigate the stars while traveling across the ocean. The most exciting discovery was 1,845 copper ingots, weighing as much as 16 to 17 tons altogether. Those copper ingots, or pieces of pure metal, are still in great condition because the hull of the ship and layers of sand protected them from ocean water. The scientists even managed to read the trademarks on them on site and learned they were made by a super wealthy German trading company. There were also more than 2,000 shiny gold and silver coins from different countries, and 105 enormous elephant tusks weighing about 2 tons. The tusks were likely supposed to become luxury items, like jewelry or carvings at the destination. Archaeologists took some DNA samples from the tusks and found that they came from West African forests and savanna elephants. Researchers were lucky that the ship was found in a restricted diamond mining area. No scavengers were able to get their hands on the treasures. The Bom Jesus remains the oldest and most valuable shipwreck that was ever discovered off the western coast of sub-Saharan Africa. Another shipwreck recently found by accident was buried under a 10-foot tall sand dune near the Caspian Sea. Some people call it the world's largest lake, and it has water levels that rise and fall over time because of the changes in weather patterns. These changes can move sand and uncover things like this shipwreck and other treasures along the coast. As the dunes slowly disappeared, the ship started to show. Before digging it out, scientists worried that waves from the sea might damage the wreck. To protect it, they built a wall using thousands of sandbags to keep the waves away. When the ship was uncovered, they discovered it was a 3-masted, 92-foot-long merchant ship with a strong double hull. Wood samples showed the ship was built in the 18th to 19th century using trees like Scots pine, spruce, and larch from the Volga River area or the Caucasus. They even found buckwheat and plants from the same region, which were probably traded or used to feed the sailors. It proves that the ship was part of a group of merchant ships that once sailed the Caspian Sea. An amateur fisherman who was 20 feet under the sea off the coast of Turkey noticed some huge metal remains. He had an underwater camera, so he made footage of the discovery and took it to scientists. They immediately started an investigation and learned that it must be a shipwreck from the first decades of the 20th century. It could be one of the Ottoman Empire ships that had an important mission to deliver supplies, but disappeared without a trace. Scientists got permission to study this Black Sea wreck in detail to learn more about its mysteries. They're hoping to find its shipyard documents to find some answers, as the ship itself is in terrible condition and is tricky to work with. Robot submersibles that belong to an oil and gas company noticed hundreds of intact ancient storage jars sitting on the seabed in the eastern Mediterranean. Experts think those jars are 3,300 years old. This makes the find the oldest shipwreck from the deep sea. The jugs were probably used to store oil or other agricultural products like fruit. This proves that the people who made them organized maritime trade and had incredible navigational skills. It looks like the ancient mariners managed to traverse the Mediterranean Sea without a line of sight to any coast. All they could see was the horizon, so they must have used the sun and other stars to find their way. Off the coast of Sicily, under 20 feet of sand and rock. Archaeologists found a shipwreck so old that they aren't even sure what materials were used to build it. They think the ship is from the 5th or 6th century BCE, which means it's over 2,500 years old. This ancient ship wasn't alone. Researchers also found 2 iron anchors shaped like an upside-down T from around the 7th century of the Common Era and 4 stone anchors from prehistoric times nearby. One of the stone anchors was broken and may have had wooden pieces attached to help it hold on to the seafloor. They figured out that the ship itself was built using the on-shell technique. The wooden planks of the ship were connected so tightly that they could support the ship on their own, with extra beams added just to make it stronger. Sadly, the ship's wooden hull is very fragile now because tiny sea creatures that eat wood have damaged it over the years. Scientists are being extra careful as they study it to make sure it doesn't fall apart. This discovery is such a big deal because it was built during a time when Sicily was super important for trade. Back then, the Greeks and Punics were trying to take control of the seas long before Rome became the ruler of the Mediterranean. By studying this ship, scientists hope to learn more about how people traveled and traded in those ancient times. One more shipwreck, this time off the coast of Kenya. Could be from Vasco da Gama's final voyage. This Portuguese explorer was the first European to reach India by sea around the Cape of Good Hope. Local fishermen discovered the shipwreck in question in 2013. When an underwater archaeologist came to check it out, he found some treasures at the spot: elephant tusks and valuable copper ingots. If this find really has to do with Vasco da Gama, then it must be from the 16th century. It was the year of his 3rd and final voyage to India. Da Gama led a huge fleet of 20 ships, one of which was the São Jorge. Most of the ship is hidden under layers of coral, and a whole team of scientists are carefully digging trenches to find parts of the ship's wooden frame and hull.
The year was 1865. It was a boom of migration worldwide, with novel places discovered and new settlements created. Without planes like we have now, a ship was the only way to escape from the old life and journey towards a new, hopefully brighter future. So, a voyage like that was quite a regular thing to do. More than 500 immigrants safely reached Queensland, and the ship was supposed to head back to London sometime later. It was indeed a long journey, but not many people were willing to return to England. After all, they had chosen to come to Australia to create a brand new life. So it was only natural that the ship would come back nearly empty. However, the return trip was still quite lucrative, thanks to the cargo the ship would carry. The amount of produce ready to be shipped was substantial, primarily consisting of wool soaked in arsenic, tallow, and hides. It was 2 birds with 1 stone. Not only could the crew wait out the winter, warm in Australia, while England endured bitter cold, but they also wouldn't waste their time. With the sheer volume of produce to be loaded, it would take them around 3 months to accomplish this task. Reports were circulating that the Fiery Star was almost done loading up, but it turned out that the assessment was a bit too optimistic. To pass the time, Captain Ewell thought it would be a good idea to reach out to the Acclimatization Society and offer to help transport any animals they wanted to send to England on the Fiery Star. He already had some emus and kangaroos on board, but there was still room. The society held a vote, and they were totally on board, pun intended, with Captain Ewell's idea. They figured sending some taligalas would be a great plan. Even though a few of these birds were already in England, the French Society needed a couple, and they could get them shipped there through England. Little did the crew know that all this cargo, all the produce they were willing to sell in England, would ultimately lead to the ship's destruction. Not only was the Fiery Star lost, but most of the people on board did not survive to complete the voyage. March 23rd. That was the day when the ship manifest was finally published. A manifest is a list that details the cargo, passengers, and crew of a ship, plane, or vehicle, primarily for customs officials. This document helps those involved in the transport Verify that everyone and everything that was loaded is still on board when the vehicle reaches its destination. Once it's published, it means the ship is almost ready to depart. There were 3 possible ways of passenger accommodation. First, there was the saloon, the antiquated name for first class. Next, there was the second cabin, which is, logically, second class. Finally, there was the steerage, the cheapest form of passenger accommodation on a ship. Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, many people traveled from their homelands, often to North America and Australia, looking for a fresh start. Most of them were poor and had limited funds for travel. In total, there were 8 people in the saloon, another 8 in the second cabin, and only 21 steerage passengers. Out of the 37 passengers, only one, John Ormond, would make it out alive. He bought a ticket for the steerage, so unlike the Titanic situation, in this case, the class didn't really matter. The crew members list wasn't as detailed as the passengers. It was known that, in total, there were around 55 people in the crew, from able-bodied seamen to crew members simply called boys. But there's something telling me that the crew wasn't really that important for the captain. In reality, all that mattered to him was to make as much money as possible, shipping tons of dangerous, flammable cargo. Out of over 50 crew members, only 17 survived that voyage. But there was actually one more crew member who actually survived it all, just because they weren't let in. Sarah Johnson disguised herself as a man and planned to sneak onto the ship. However, something about her looks made the captain get suspicious, so he called the police and made Sarah leave the ship as he didn't want any immoral behavior to take place. Well, he saved her life. For him, it was the last voyage. The captain, W. Hunter Ewell, was quite a celebrity apparently. He already had a record of the safe landing of immigrants in the previous year, so there seemingly was no reason to worry. The trip promised to be safe. Clipper Fiery Star left Moreton Bay bound for London. The passengers took their places. The cargo had already been loaded. The full list is astonishing. In addition to all the wool, tallow, cotton, hides, and horns, there were also 6 cases of arrowroot and various other packages. And we can't forget the animals the captain took aboard too. The Fiery Star was far away, yet still observable to the east as it headed toward the Pacific Ocean. This was the last information available until May 26, when news of its destruction emerged from Brisbane. Chief Officer William Sargent's log reveals that the Fiery Star took 12 days to reach the southern tip of New Zealand, passing on April 11, 1865. The trip was going well until heavy seas ruined 2 longboats on April 17. On this day, a strong odor of smoke alerted the captain. When he checked, he found the lower hold completely filled with smoke from a fire fueled by the ship's flammable cargo. The hatches were quickly closed to try to contain the flames, but by the next day, the heat and toxic smoke had forced passengers out of their cabins. George Maber was one of the lucky survivors. He was the ship's engineer, and he recalled the chaotic events on April 20th, as Captain Ewell and most of the crew and passengers tried to evacuate in rough weather. At around 6 p.m., the ship took on water, and without much warning, Captain Ewell, 4 crew members, and a few female passengers hopped into a lifeboat and headed out. The next boat, managed by the second mate, Mr. Adio, was a gig, followed by a crowded jolly boat. Lastly, there was a waste boat, which was barely seaworthy, with 2 men constantly bailing water to keep it afloat. The plan was for the boats to stay close to the Fiery Star overnight and head for the Chatham Islands the next morning. But by dawn on April 21st, all 4 boats had vanished without a trace. On the burning ship, there were 17 crew members and passenger John Ormond, who banded together under Chief Officer William Sargent's leadership. For 5 days and nights, George Maber pumped water on the fire without rest. He volunteered to go down the forehatch with a rope around him and a handkerchief over his mouth. He discovered that the foremast had been burned through for about 7 inches, and the port side was severely damaged, resembling an empty shell. Exhausted, he returned for fresh air, but later descended again with Quartermaster Marshall to access a water tank. They couldn't open the lid, and as George crawled over the hides, he felt himself sinking. When they reached the deck, they collapsed from exhaustion. The cargo had been destroyed by smoke and fire, and the heat on the deck was intolerable. The crew survived on limited rations and caged chickens, using every spare piece of wood, including pigsties, for the pumps. Distressed pigs ran wild in the heat. A raft was constructed, but was too weak for the open sea. Sleep was elusive, and the crew had lost everything, with only hopes of reaching land or meeting another ship. Finally, the Dauntless appeared and sent a lifeboat to the Fiery Star. Captain Moore boarded the Fiery Star on May 12th, and after assessing the situation, he agreed that the crew could do no more. They boarded the Dauntless at 4 p.m., witnessing the Fiery Star succumb to flames by 11:30 p.m. It was a narrow escape. Being afraid of the ocean is a very understandable fear. We have it in our genes. In the past, humans had to avoid certain dangerous situations, like big animals and deep bodies of water, in order to survive. Plus, we've only explored 5% of the oceans, so we never know what we can stumble upon there. In regular conditions, GoPro is just a camera. But if you find it lying at the bottom of a 400-foot pit in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, that will make your blood run cold. I know 400 feet may not seem like much, but a person who is deep diving for fun usually can swim from 59 to 98 feet deep only, unless they're a professional diver. But say you made it to that pit and retrieved that GoPro. That would have still been fatal to you. In this specific hole where the camera was found, there would be a layer of hydrogen sulfide, a very dangerous and foul-smelling gas, at the mark of 300 feet. The gadget was 100 feet lower, alongside its owners, two long-lost explorers. To this day, very few people manage to dive this deep and go back unscraped. In fact, the deceased explorers were found only with the help of submarines. Now, you might be curious about the content of the GoPro. In stories like this, we expect proof of foul play or sinister footage. But the only thing found there were the images of happy times the explorers had during their trip. A sad ending to a vacay. Now, in deep waters, you can also find many species that seem to be otherworldly, but in a cute and interesting way, like the alien sponge. This fun little fella is a sponge first seen near the Mariana Trench in 2016. It's actually part of an ecosystem dubbed Forest of the Weird. Okay, this makes it sound a bit creepy. And what adds to the weirdness is the fact that the alien sponge had two little holes that resemble little eyes, so like it's peeking at you. Ah, another fun fact? The skeleton of this type of sponge is made of glass. And if you're afraid of cockroaches, I'll let you take a deep breath here. Ready? Cool. Because on the ocean floor, there are more than 20 different types of giant isopods, beetle lookalikes, that can be as big as 14 inches. Yikes! But fear not, these guys usually roam the ocean floor for food. So, unless you dive 7,000 feet, which we've just seen is not possible, you won't run into them. Now, despite the horror movie name, the bloody belly comb jelly is actually a fascinating creature you can also find in the ocean. They live in the twilight zone of the ocean, which is between 820 and 4,900 feet below sea level. Pretty far from where you usually soak your feet. But what's so cool about this jelly is its color. Because in the twilight zone, the light is very scarce. Many animals either emit a faint glow, like the anglerfish, or create a camouflage. The jelly here is blood red because, in the pitch-black darkness of the ocean, other animals won't see a digesting, colorful, bioluminescent prey inside its stomach. Besides, the jelly has a row of combs that spark a very beautiful iridescent light. Beautiful and lethal. Humans also have their fair share of contribution to the weird fest that is the ocean floor. Depending on where you swim, you might just find parts of rocket engines used during the Apollo program. Now, when a rocket is launched into space, Parts of it are dropped into the ocean where it runs out of propellant, making the rocket itself lighter. And a part of the Apollo 11 rocket engine, yes, that one that first took humans to land on the moon, was actually recovered from the ocean after more than 4 decades. And you can see it at the Museum of Flight in Seattle. Not a space fan? Well, there's something for the Oregon Trail lovers too. There are 2 locomotives living their best lives, or worst, depending on your point of view, just off the coast of New Jersey. They're from the 1850s and are sitting under 90 feet of water. They probably fell off of a transportation ship during a rough storm, or were intentionally pushed over the barge so that the ship didn't sink. Most of these things can only be seen while diving, but worry not. Even if you have a lingering fear of the deep ocean, you can still find weird things by simply walking on the beach. Look at these bizarre Garfield landline phones washed away in Brittany, France. The French have been having bizarre encounters with the sarcastic orange cat since the 80s, and it took about 30 years for French farmer René Morvan to come forward with a simple explanation. A shipping container with Garfield merchandise got stranded in the sea, only to find its final resting place in a sea cave. We bet Brittany locals are still haunted by the creepy smile of that landline phone. And just like a storm uncovered the Garfield secret stash, it also moved a few ships that sank more than 600 years ago. But this is not a simple Titanic story. It actually sounds more like Pirates of the Caribbean, because when the storm moved those old ships, authorities from Caesarea found 2,000 gold coins, some silver and bronze coins, gemstones, and rings. It was a bigger treasure than a dragon could hoard. But don't get your hopes up. Even though most of the underwater archaeological zones in this region are open to divers, these treasures are safely tucked away in a museum. Speaking of pirates, and I was, another weird thing you can find chillin' in the ocean is the pirate city of Port Royal, Jamaica. In 1692, the city was devastated by an earthquake, followed by a tsunami. A really bad twofer. But the good news is, you can still visit it today, well, scuba diving, that is. This is actually not the only sunken city in the world. There's also Thonis Heracleion in Egypt, which is not at the bottom of the sea per se, but at the mouth of the Nile River. There's also Baiae, a Roman town built atop a supervolcano. Now, you might be thinking Baiae had the same fate as Pompeii, but guess what? The floor actually sank and the town went down with it. So, have you ever heard of underwater crop circles? Back in 1995, divers in Japan spotted perfectly round circles formed in the sand. They were 6 feet in diameter and looked like those crop circles from sci-fi movies. Scientists simply couldn't figure out what or who did it until they caught the culprit red-handed, a tiny male pufferfish only 4 inches long. This little guy uses its body and fins to draw circles and squiggles and decorates his creation with seashells and corals. It takes the fish about a week to do so. All this hard work is part of a mating ritual, and if a female pufferfish likes the art, she will lay her eggs there, right in the center. The circular design of the underwater crop circle actually channels fresh water to the middle of the circle, the ideal scenario for the eggs to develop. And guess what? After she lays the eggs, the female pufferfish leaves, and it's the male that tends the eggs. But just in case fishes are not your thing, we can also offer you a cargo of rubber duckies, turtles, beavers, and frogs, 28,000 of them to be exact. These bath toys were traveling from China to the US, but much like our friend Garfield, were caught in a storm in 1992. From the North Pacific, our friendly duckies and beavers made their way to the UK by 2007. But some were bolder and traveled to Australia, Indonesia, Chile, Hawaii, and even Alaska. Now, have you ever seen a strange thing washed up by the beach? Let us know in the comments. Bye. July 17, 1998. It started like a usual quiet evening in the villages along the north coast of Papua New Guinea. Then, at 5:49 p.m., The ground shook violently. Suddenly, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck. It sent shockwaves through the region. Walls cracked, homes trembled, and the earth beneath the villagers' feet shifted and twisted. It lasted for 19 seconds, with a depth of 19 miles, and seemed like a typical earthquake. And while it caused some damage, this wasn't the kind of destruction that screamed doom. So, people were tricked. They thought it was over. They didn't know that the worst was still coming. Then some villagers noticed mysterious lights. It began with a flash of red light along the horizon, a streak that looked like fire. It appeared shortly after the initial earthquake, stretching across the northern sky above the ocean. It flared brilliantly, then vanished in an instant. What could it have been? People started speculating whether it's a warning about something or just sunlight reflecting strangely. But just as it disappeared, it was followed by a loud booming sound from the sea. No one knew what that meant, and some villagers went to the beach, curious to scan the views. What they noticed there chilled them to their core. The ocean looked wrong. The water wasn't calm. It churned, bubbled, and boiled in an eerie, unnatural way. That's when they saw it. A massive wave building in the distance, rushing toward them with terrifying speed. Panic spread like wildfire. People climbed trees, pushed boats into the lagoon, hoping to escape the approaching monster. Unfortunately, it was too late. The first wave hit with unimaginable force and swept away entire villages in an instant. The debris was scattered around, trees were uprooted, buildings were displaced up to 160 to 200 feet inland. Even decades later, some of these affected villages can't be accessed by roads. At the same time, another strange phenomenon emerged. Many people described a red glow at the crest of the tsunami, as though the wave carried fire in its peak. They described an eerie glow as the wave approached the shoreline, a deep and unearthly hue, visible even from far-off places like Itape. And this was only the beginning. 2 more waves followed in quick succession. The second one was the most horrifying, from 33 to almost 50 feet high. By the time the ocean finally receded, the coastline was unrecognizable. After the waves had ravaged everything, leaving villages in ruins, the sky put on one final display. Survivors described a yellow or yellow-red glow illuminating the sky over the ocean. One man who survived by climbing up a tree saw the glow lingering over the horizon, stretching toward the direction of Arap and Itape. At Malol, the Sisters of the Mission looked out to the sea and were stunned by the surreal calm of the golden water. It was still as glass and lit by this unearthly glow. The glow was so vivid, it lit up the entire devastated landscape. Luckily, this allowed survivors to begin searching for their missing loved ones. A lot of people believe these lights were supernatural, an omen of sorts. This event ended up being catastrophic, sudden, and unpredictable. The Royal Australian Air Force responded immediately, sending in planes with relief supplies. People started an investigation. What exactly caused this disaster? Turns out, this tsunami wasn't like most others. Tsunami waves are very different from regular ones. We usually imagine huge breaking waves next to the beach. But they might first look like the water is rushing away from the shore. Stay vigilant because this is a warning sign. The water will come back very quickly and rise like a massive tide, often with devastating force. Rarely they come alone. They often arrive in a series, destroying everything along the coastline. They happen when a large amount of water in the ocean or a big lake gets suddenly pushed out of place. The main causes are usually earthquakes, which happen when the Earth's tectonic plates shift suddenly under the ocean. They start lifting or lowering the seafloor, and this pushes the water above it, causing huge waves. This tsunami in Papua New Guinea was completely different though. At first, scientists thought that it was caused by the Australian and Pacific tectonic plates slipping against each other. But it turned out that the earthquake itself wasn't the problem. It really was pretty small. However, it had triggered a massive underwater landslide. When the seabed shifted, it pushed away an insane volume of water. The waves reached almost 50 feet high, like a 4-story building. That's how we realized that even small earthquakes can actually cause massive tsunamis via underwater landslides. What's even worse is that tsunamis like this can happen with little or no warning, simply because the earthquake alarms don't go off. But what about that bubbling and boiling of water that people saw? Turns out, this was the release of underwater gases. Beneath the ocean floor, there are pockets of gas trapped in the sediments. For example, methane, which is often found in oil and gas fields, or hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells like rotten eggs. During the earthquake, the seabed probably cracked or shifted, releasing these gases into the water. This caused bubbling or boiling. The water might have heated in some areas. People mentioned that the waves felt hot and even stung their skin. The chemicals in it most likely made things even worse, irritating their skin. These gas eruptions might also have played a role in making the tsunami stronger. Maybe they were the ones that loosened the sediments that caused the underwater landslide, or pushed the water up when the gas escaped. It's like shaking up a bottle of soda. If the pressure releases suddenly, it causes a huge reaction. But what about the strange lights? Well, that's more complicated. There's a phenomenon called earthquake lights. They happen all around the world, flashes, glows, or aurora-like effects. Although they're usually white, bluish, or even multicolored. Sometimes these lights last seconds, sometimes up to tens of minutes, at any point in an earthquake. If we go by their description, then the first red flash could have happened because of electricity. Earth's crust is full of quartz and similar stuff that can release electricity under pressure. When the earthquake shook the ground, all that electricity traveled up into the air. Gases from before could have helped here. They could ignite or interact with charged particles in the air, making the lights even brighter. As the wave continued to churn up sand, rocks, and debris, the intense pressure and movement could have released more sparks. This could cause the fire-like lights at the wave's crest that people noticed. Finally, the yellow light could have been all these electricized gases rising into the atmosphere. Methane and other gases interacted with Earth's magnetic field and created something like aurora borealis. But these are all speculations. The most heartbreaking part of the story is that tragedy in Papua New Guinea was preventable. Scientists knew the tsunami was coming, though it arrived earlier than they expected. The first wave struck between 10 and 25 minutes after the earthquake, about 5 minutes earlier than models showed. That means that it started somewhere close to the shore. The reason no one evacuated in time was simple. Local people didn't have a tsunami warning system or even enough knowledge about tsunamis to understand that an earthquake might lead to one, or why the water was acting weird. Things like that haven't happened in Papua New Guinea in over 60 years. But this was a wake-up call. From this immense tragedy came lessons and resilience. A year after the disaster, all the surviving locals watched a documentary that explained what had happened and taught them what to do if it ever happened again. This effort saved lives because the story did happen again. A similar earthquake and tsunami struck the nearby island of Vanuatu in November 1999. But this time, the villagers were ready. They remembered what they had seen in the film. Instead of panic, they acted quickly, and luckily, hundreds of lives were saved. Now, tsunami warning systems are everywhere in developed areas. They can send alerts to people via sirens, text messages, or broadcasts as soon as a potential tsunami is detected.
The lookout shouts, "Iceberg right ahead!" The Titanic strikes the ice. Water starts flooding in. Third-class passengers are locked up. There aren't enough lifeboats for everyone. Panic sets in. Violins are playing. The ship sinks. Well, we all know the story of the movie Titanic like the back of our hand by now. But what if I told you that Hollywood lied to us? To tell the real story of what happened that freezing night in 1912, we need to rewind a bit. The lookout shouts, "Iceberg right ahead!" Yep, that part was true. Just before 11:40 at night, Frederick Fleet noticed something darker than the sea directly ahead. As the ship got closer, he realized it was an iceberg. The engines were quickly reversed and the ship turned sharply. Instead of hitting it head-on, Titanic scraped along the side of the berg, sprinkling ice on the forward deck. If you remember, in the movie, Jack and Rose are having a romantic moment when they feel the ship shudder after hitting the iceberg. Everything shakes as if they were in the middle of a light earthquake. Some real-life passengers reported feeling something similar after the impact, but according to Titanic survivor Frank Prentice, it wasn't exactly like that. He said there was no impact as such, and it all felt more like slamming on your car brakes. The ship stopped, and that was that. Some people even slept right through the collision, confirming that there wasn't such an abrupt impact. Mr. Prentice, curious about what had happened, left his cabin and went out to the deck. When he got there, all he could see was a little ice on the surface, not the towering iceberg that Jack and Rose saw. But as we all know by now, the real damage happened below the waterline, where the iceberg had a jagged spur that slashed a 300-foot gash in Titanic's hull. Once the crew realized how severe the damage was, they immediately began sending distress calls to nearby ships, asking for help. At some point in the movie, the radio operator goes to the captain and says there is only one ship nearby, the RMS Carpathia, which later ends up rescuing many passengers. But in real life, there were more ships around. It's believed that the SS Californian was only about 23 miles away. This ship might have actually seen the Titanic sinking, or at the very least, seen its rockets exploding high in the sky. Yet, for reasons we will never fully understand, they didn't try to help. Let's get back to the story. Now, people need to get off the ship. At 12:45, lifeboat number 7 was the first to be lowered. Just like in the movie, women and children were told to go first. But in reality, some women were hesitant and even refused to get into the lifeboats. Mr. Prentice said this happened mainly for two reasons. First, these lifeboats were high and passengers were terrified of the 70-foot drop from the deck to the ocean below. And second, most women didn't believe the Titanic would actually sink. It was called unsinkable after all. So the idea of getting into a lifeboat seemed pointless at the time. This mindset probably explains why Eloise Smith, a first-class passenger, recalled that there was no panic or chaos at first. Other survivors backed this up, saying that no women or kids were crying. But one thing that was indeed concerning, at least for the crew, was the possibility that the lifeboats might buckle under too much weight. This is one of the theories why the first few lifeboats left carrying only a fraction of their full capacity. Like lifeboat number 7, which only carried 27 people in it, even though it could hold up to 65. In total, Titanic had 20 lifeboats, which could carry about half of the 2,200 people on board that night. But that didn't happen. And now we know the passengers had no idea there weren't enough for everyone. As women were calmly getting into the first lifeboats, musicians headed up to the deck. Their only goal was to play and keep the passengers calm. That's a pretty well-known fact. But the real story is that some survivors said they never saw or heard the band. No violinists whatsoever. It's not like Hollywood misled you though. The musicians did play for over 2 hours after the ship had hit the iceberg. So maybe these passengers were just too panicked to notice the songs, or the musicians started playing later than we think. Now, it's time to talk about the terrible treatment that third-class passengers received. The movie portrayed the crew as cruel, locking the less fortunate below deck like animals, giving them no chance to reach the lifeboats and save their lives. But the official inquiry into the disaster suggested that wasn't true. I mean, yes, fewer third-class passengers survived compared to those in first and second class, but there were other factors at play. Many third-class passengers were reluctant to leave the ship, clinging to their belongings, and had a harder time making their way up from the cabins, which were at extreme ends of the ship. Some survivors confirmed that they were not locked up. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Mrs. George Wabi, a Lebanese woman traveling in third class, said that when chaos had erupted, some brave crew members and well-dressed first-class passengers had actually helped her get up to the first-class deck and eventually onto a lifeboat. At first, the Titanic was sinking slowly, bit by bit. Passengers reported seeing the water rising and hearing pops and cracks. Then, there was a loud boom. Some said there had been just one explosion, while others described it as a series of smaller explosions, which they'd thought had been the bulkheads giving way. And there's also a group of people who said they had only heard a rumbling sound. So not everyone agreed on the sound they had heard, but one thing is a fact. By 2:18 in the morning, the lights on Titanic went out, and the ship plunged into complete darkness. As the bow continued sinking, the stern rose out of the water, putting immense pressure on the middle of the ship. This caused the Titanic to break in two. In James Cameron's movie, this moment is pretty dramatic, with the ship sinking almost straight down into the water. But in reality, the break probably happened at a much lower angle, likely just below the waterline. Even so, it tilted enough that people couldn't stay on their feet and started sliding into the water. One interesting thing is that it wasn't until the wreckage was found in 1985 that it was finally confirmed the Titanic had broken apart. Up until then, survivors had given conflicting stories. At least 8 survivors claimed they had seen the ship split. Emily Ryerson, a first-class passenger, described it as if the Titanic had been sliced in half with a knife. But there was also a small number of witnesses that insisted Titanic had gone down intact. At the time, this theory was more accepted because most people still didn't believe that the supposedly indestructible ship could break in half. So why the conflicting reports? Okay, so what you don't see in the movies, for obvious reasons, is how incredibly dark it was when the tragedy happened. It was like being in a room with no light, where you can only make out shapes and shadows. That's what it was like on the lifeboats. This means passengers couldn't really see what was happening, and most of those who were close to the ship either lost their lives or were too focused on trying to survive to pay attention to the details of the wreck. Although James Cameron's film didn't fully capture how terrifyingly dark the disaster truly was, the 2012 TV series Titanic did a better job of showing the pitch-black horror of that night. Even then, the reality was much darker and more terrifying than either of these two productions could portray.
You have an hour before you take your last breath, even though just a second ago you were perfectly healthy and nothing posed any danger to your life. Well, the good news is your life can still be saved. Effective antivenoms are available, but if you choose to neglect the sting, you'll bite the dust for sure. This camouflage artist is the world's most lethal fish. In total, there are around 1,200 venomous fish on our planet, but the stonefish is the toughest one. They've got 13 dorsal fins that can inject extremely poisonous venom. Remember I mentioned camouflage skills? It's the main twist to this story. You see, unlike sharks or any other predator fish, the stonefish won't attack you. It's not a predator, it's prey. So, to stay safe, it needs to somehow protect itself. Thus, it developed a super skill of turning into a stone, sort of. So, if you ever get stung by this guy, it's not because it's aggressive, it's because of an unfortunate course of events. Most people had this unpleasant experience just because they accidentally stepped on a stonefish while it was pretending to be a stone or coral on the bottom. As you might have guessed, something that can easily pretend to be a stone doesn't exactly look cute. These guys are scaleless, their skin is covered in multiple warts, and they are multicolored. You can see shades of gray, brown, and patches of orange, red, and yellow. Sometimes they can even be covered in algae. They occupy quite a large territory in the Indo-Pacific Ocean, which means they're everywhere, from Mauritius to Queensland in Australia. Okay, we're going to need a disclaimer here. This fact is very sensitive, but if you want to live your life long and healthy, I suggest you don't skip it. This is a fly. Pretty harmless and definitely way less powerful than you, a human being, are. Yet, chances are that this gentle buddy can destroy your body. Now here's how the story goes. Some time ago, a lady from the UK decided to go on a cool trip to South America. Sounds exotic and not banal at all. Rochelle, who was 27 back then, went to Peru with her boyfriend. When she got back to her home country, she started having severe headaches. She couldn't understand what was going on. Then, half of her face felt terrible discomfort, and suddenly, some weird sound in her head started haunting her. One day, she went to bed, only to wake up the next morning to see that her pillow was soaking wet with some weird liquid. Not blood, not water, just some substance. She rushed to the hospital, where doctors said she had an ear infection. But when doctors looked closer, they saw a hole in her ear canal. It was around half an inch big, but it was swarming with maggots. Yeah, ooh. Now, Rochelle was lucky. The emergency brain scan showed no major damage whatsoever. The eardrum, blood vessels, facial nerves, they were all right. The big question was how to make the maggots leave poor Rochelle's ear. We all get it, it's pretty tight inside the ears, and even small forceps weren't very helpful. So to save the lady, the doctors decided to use olive oil. They expected the maggots to drown, and indeed 2 maggots did. Yet there were 8 more. The most horrifying thing was that the lab analysis showed that a New World screwworm, that's the official name of the fly that interfered with Rochelle's health, had laid eggs in the ear canal that the maggots were chewing. But how on earth did this happen? Well, while she was on vacay in Peru, she once walked through a swarm of flies. One of them got into her ear. She shooed it away, but it had more than enough time to lay eggs inside. Doctors helped Rochelle evict the unwanted guest, and luckily, there won't be any long-term consequences. But we all get it that it could have been much worse. Now, I don't need to tell you that caving is extremely dangerous, do I? Back in June 1990, a man called Gary Lutz took his sons, Buddy and Tim, on a spelunking adventure to West Virginia's New Trout Cave. He packed food, water, and spare headlamps. But here's where he messed up. He left the pack behind when they reached the maze, a tight spot with jagged rocks. He figured they'd grab the supplies before their headlamps ran out of charge. Oops, bad move. The boys' headlamps went dark soon after, and their attempts to backtrack got them lost. Then, Lutz's headlamp ran out of charge too, plunging them into total darkness. For 5 horrific days, they had no food, no water, and no light. They started coughing up cave dust and hallucinating from dehydration. Luckily, someone noticed that their car had been parked for days and called the authorities. The rescue team pointed out that the family had broken the cardinal rules of caving. Always carry 3 sources of light each, and always tell someone where you're going and when you'll be back. Sadly, some tourists never go back from vacation. They become statistics. And some people sometimes have a narrow escape from the Grim Reaper without even knowing it. Just an example here. A tourist in Australia filmed themselves handling a super dangerous creature and uploaded the footage to Reddit. In the video, the tourist is holding a blue-ringed octopus, with Mandarin writing on the screen saying, "Such a beautiful octopus." After filming, they shake the octopus off their hand and luckily put it back into the water before it could sting them. The thing is, the blue-ringed octopus is one of the world's most dangerous marine animals. It packs enough venom to make 26 adults kick their buckets. The tourist had no clue how dangerous it was. People on Reddit were freaking out. One person commented, "Do they even know how lucky they are to be alive after doing something that monumentally stupid?" A woman from New Hampshire got some nasty burns after veering off the trail in Yellowstone National Park and falling into scalding water near the Old Faithful geyser. The 60-year-old, along with her husband and their dog, had left the safety of the boardwalk and was walking off the designated trail near Mallard Lake Trailhead when she broke through the thin crust over the water. She ended up with second- and third-degree burns on her lower leg. Luckily, her husband and the dog were fine, but the lady was rushed to a hospital for treatment. Now, park officials are reminding everyone to stick to the boardwalks and trails in hydrothermal areas and be super cautious. The ground there is fragile and thin, with scalding hot water just below the surface. Pets are allowed in some developed areas of Yellowstone, but they're not permitted on boardwalks, hiking trails, in the backcountry, or in thermal areas. Hot springs in Yellowstone have injured and made people meet their early demise more than any other natural feature. At least 22 people have passed away from hot spring-related injuries since 1890. Hey, what's cooking? Oh, it's you. Jumping off a bridge into a river filled with crocodiles. What could possibly go wrong? Turns out, a lot. One New Year's Eve, Australian tourist Aaron Langworthy decided to try bungee jumping off a bridge that connects Zimbabwe and Zambia, right near Victoria Falls. It's a 360-foot drop of pure adrenaline. But for Langworthy, things went sideways when her bungee cord snapped, sending her plunging into the Zambezi River, which is known to be home to plenty of crocodiles. Now, Erin herself says it was a miracle she survived. When she fell, she blacked out on impact and felt like she'd been slapped all over, but the cold water shocked her back to consciousness. Now, it's easy to judge tourists for taking risks like this, but bungee jumping has been a thing at this spot for over a decade, drawing more than 50,000 tourists each year and bringing in much-needed revenue for both Zimbabwe and Zambia. The authorities claim bungee jumping is safe. The probability of an accident like Aaron had is 1 in 500,000 jumps. So I think Aaron should go buy a lottery ticket. Well, here you are. You're getting into your submarine, feeling a bit anxious. You're going to descend hundreds of feet underwater to explore the ocean floor. So many things can go wrong. Technical issues, insane water pressure, dangerous marine monsters, mysterious eerie sounds. Wait, what? Eerie sounds so deep underwater? Yep, a strange humming noise is coming from the ocean depths. What makes it even creepier is that it only appears during dusk and dawn. This noise might act as a dinner bell, since it's likely to have a connection to massive groups of sea creatures moving up and down through the water to feed. But so far, it's just a theory. Using highly sensitive underwater microphones, researchers recorded a mysterious low-frequency hum at depths of 660 to 3,300 feet. The sound wasn't very loud, just 3 to 6 decibels above the usual ocean background noise. For comparison, when someone is whispering in a quiet library, the sound reaches 30 decibels. The underwater noise also had a puzzling or humming quality. The weirdest thing? Despite their efforts, the researchers couldn't pinpoint a single species responsible for the sound. The noise originates in a region known as the twilight zone of the ocean. This region is dark and doesn't have many nutrients, with no sunlight for photosynthesis. Life here relies on organic debris falling from above, such as deceased organisms or waste material. At the same time, while it may sound barren, the twilight zone is far from empty. A 2015 study estimated that up to 90% of the world's fish could live in this zone, including many undiscovered species. Now, back to the mysterious noise. The researchers believe the sound may be linked to the vertical migration of small marine creatures like fish, shrimp, and squid. These animals move upward toward the surface at sunset to feed on plankton and nutrients, using darkness to avoid predators. At sunrise, they return to the depths to hide. This migration, which is one of the largest animal movements on Earth, involves billions of organisms and occurs daily. Scientists suspect that the strange hum might occur during this migration, as a way for the creatures to communicate or coordinate their movements. It might also serve as a signal to indicate when it's safe for a group to go to the surface and feed. If some animals indeed use the hum to communicate, it could help us understand deep-sea life better. The Twilight Zone has always been considered a quiet environment, But such a discovery hints at complex social behaviors and interactions among its inhabitants. But it's not only the ocean that produces bizarre sounds. Earth is humming non-stop too. Unfortunately, you can't hear this soundtrack. This hum isn't from earthquakes. It's produced by subtle ongoing vibrations in the planet's crust. They're too faint for us to feel and can only be detectable with special equipment. Scientists have long known about this phenomenon called free oscillation and have recorded this persistent hum. Earthquakes are the most noticeable ground movements. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, Earth experiences about 500,000 earthquakes every year. Of those, only 100,000 are strong enough to be felt, and around 100 cause noticeable damage. But in the quieter moments between earthquakes, the planet is still constantly vibrating with smaller, unnoticeable movements. Unlike the sudden jolts of earthquakes, this hum is steady and uniform, and it's a byproduct of microseismic activity. Seismometers, tools used to record ground vibrations, can detect this sound anywhere on land. For years, researchers have been debating the origins of this hum. Some thought it came from ocean waves reaching deep into the seafloor. Others believed it was caused by colliding waves on the ocean's surface. By 2015, scientists had confirmed that both factors contributed to Earth's constant vibration. And although this hum has been recorded on land, now we also have much clearer, more detailed underwater recordings. To study the hum, researchers used spherical seismometers on the seafloor in the Indian Ocean near an island east of Madagascar. Between September 2012 and November 2013, they placed 57 freefall seismometers across a 772 square mile area. These devices are designed to sink into the ocean floor and record even the faintest vibrations. Over the course of the 11-month study, the team filtered out noise from ocean waves and seafloor currents. They got clear, consistent signals of Earth's hum, with peaks at frequencies between 2.9 and 4.5 MHz, far below the range of human hearing, which starts at 20 Hz. The discovery of Earth's hum from the ocean floor is more than just a scientific curiosity. It gives researchers a new way to study how energy moves through the planet's crust and mantle. In any case, the world around us is filled with weird sounds that sometimes remain unexplained. One of the most intriguing examples is the bloop, an incredibly loud underwater sound recorded in 1997 by the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The sound lasted about a minute and began as a low rumble, which then increased in frequency. It was so loud that underwater microphones detected it across an astonishing 3,000 miles. Initially, some experts thought it was the call of a massive unknown sea creature. However, NOAA later determined that the source likely had been the calving of icebergs, when giant pieces of Antarctic glaciers had been breaking off and crashing into the sea. The sound, known as Julia, a strange cooing noise, could have been produced by an iceberg scraping along the ocean floor. Another sound, dubbed train, due to its resemblance to the sound of train wheels on a track, likely originated in Antarctica's Ross Sea. Then there is upsweep, a recurring seasonal scratchy noise detected in the Pacific Ocean since 1991. Despite years of research, its exact cause remains unclear. The underwater world also has bizarre sounds that can be described as choirs of fish. Scientists studying marine life off the coast of Port Hedland in Western Australia discovered that many fish species sing in synchronized choruses at dawn and dusk, much like birds. Over 18 months, researchers recorded tons of sounds, including foghorn-like calls from black jewelfish and rhythmic ba-ba-ba sounds from batfish. These fish songs, which often involve repetitive calls that overlap in large groups, are especially important for breeding, feeding, and territorial behavior. Deeper in the ocean, NOAA researchers also explored the sounds of the Challenger Deep, the deepest part of the Mariana Trench. They used a titanium-encased microphone that managed to survive the crushing pressure, over 1,000 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. Over 23 days, the recorder captured loads of noises, from the haunting songs of whales to the rumble of distant earthquakes. Now, we've already figured out that the ocean is filled with strange sounds, but you can also hear weird noises above ground. One of the most puzzling is the hum, a low-pitched noise reported by people in specific areas, such as Taos, New Mexico, or Bristol, England. The sound is often described as a faint engine-like drone, and its source remains a mystery. Some researchers think it might be a psychological phenomenon, where people focus on subtle background sounds they might otherwise ignore. In any case, no definitive answer has been found yet. Geological formations can sing too. Utah's Rainbow Bridge, a massive 300-foot-high sandstone arch, vibrates like a guitar string when exposed to sounds, distant earthquakes, or waves near Lake Powell. Scientists have studied its frequencies to understand how such vibrations could affect the bridge's stability over time. Interestingly, visitors to the Rainbow Bridge have reported hearing faint humming sounds too. The skies also have their own eerie noises. For centuries, people in polar regions have described faint sizzling, popping, and cracking sounds, accompanying auroras. A Finnish researcher made the first known recordings of these sounds and traced their origin to electrical discharges in the lower atmosphere, about 230 feet above the ground. These charges, caused by magnetic storms fueling auroras, produce faint sounds during calm and clear nights. Other natural phenomena, such as icebergs grinding against the seafloor or volcanic activity on the ocean floor, produce groans, rumbles, and crackling sounds that scientists study to learn about glacial movements and underwater geological activity. I myself produced many unusual sounds and rumbles, but, that's a subject for another video, or my next annual review. A tsunami hitting major cities on or near the Mediterranean Sea and in the northeastern part of the Atlantic Ocean is not a matter of if, but when. It is scary and surreal to think that places like Cannes or Barcelona could suddenly get slammed by a huge wave, but the fact is, European coastlines are in active tectonic areas. Only about 10% of all tsunamis worldwide happen in the Mediterranean, and there have been at least 290 tsunamis in this area since 1600 before Common Era. Despite the relatively low number, this phenomenon has caused numerous devastating disasters throughout Europe's history. Back in 1755, an estimated 8.5 magnitude earthquake with an epicenter southwest of Cape St. Vincent triggered a tsunami that destroyed most of Lisbon, the capital of Portugal. About 40 minutes after the earthquake, this massive wave just slammed into the harbor in downtown, racing up the Tagus River. The phenomenon was so fast that several people on horseback had to gallop to higher ground to avoid getting carried away. And this was just the beginning of a nightmare, with two more terrifying waves hitting Lisbon right after. A disaster like this is similar to what we see in the Pacific Ocean several times a century, but in the Atlantic, it's very rare. This type of major tsunami is expected to happen every 3 to 5 centuries, but now it could happen tomorrow. Marseille in France, Chipion in Spain, and other cities are on the list of important locations that could be flooded soon, with a roughly 100% chance of being hit by a tsunami in the next 30 years. Statistics show that the wave will probably be more than 3 feet high. I know, it doesn't sound like much, especially since when we think about tsunamis, we imagine terrifyingly tall waves, like the one that hit Lituya Bay in Alaska. In that case, the wave was over 1,700 feet tall. But we must remember that even waves only 19 inches high can be dangerous to swimmers, because it's not the height of the tsunami that matters, but also the flow and movement of the water. Not to mention the flooding, which can damage beaches, harbors, and streets. If the coastline has a small harbor and the waterfront is exceptionally low, like Cannes, this natural disaster might be much more dangerous. Tsunamis around 6 feet high can lift cars off the ground, while smaller waves can create walls of water traveling at 40 miles per hour. Plus, there are these smaller events that might not wreck everything, but still can cost a ton of money. For example, large sandbars that move around on the ocean floor, like sand dunes shifting in deserts. They can mess up pipelines or deep-sea cables for internet and communications, and that ends up costing businesses and governments millions of dollars. That's why organizations like UNESCO are worried about the possibility of a dangerous tsunami hitting Europe soon. So they're doing everything they can to prevent apocalyptic scenarios, like what happened in 2004 when an earthquake off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, caused waves over 100 feet high in coastal communities, resulting in over 200,000 lives lost. And let's not forget about 2011, when an earthquake off the coast of Tohoku, Japan, triggered a tsunami that reached about 6 miles inland and caused a major nuclear accident at a power station along the coast. Over 16,000 people lost their lives in that tragedy, and the event resulted in billions of dollars in infrastructure damage. These disasters were huge wake-up calls, and we've come a long way since 2004. We're much safer today, largely because the tsunami warning system is highly effective at quickly detecting this dangerous situation. Unlike many other natural phenomena, a tsunami can be anticipated. We may only have a few minutes to act, but if we all know what to do, many lives can be saved. And in most parts of the world, sirens are commonly used to alert people to tsunamis. To sound the siren as early as possible, initial tsunami alerts usually rely only on seismic data. First, specialists receive information about an earthquake. Seismic waves travel about 100 times faster than tsunamis, so they have enough time to analyze the data and see if the earthquake might have generated a tsunami and whether they should issue an initial tsunami alert. At U.S. warning centers, for example, scientists typically issue initial alerts within 5 minutes of an earthquake. If a tsunami is suspected, these alerts may also include information about wave arrival times, recommended actions, and potential impacts. But sounding the alarm is not enough. To save lives, coastal communities also need to be trained to respond fast and in the best way possible. That's why UNESCO produced this program called Tsunami Ready, aiming to train people living in coastal areas at risk on how to act in case of a tsunami event by the year 2030. The idea is to help communities stay safe by teaching them how to protect their livelihoods and safeguard their homes. Being recognized as Tsunami Ready by UNESCO doesn't mean a community is tsunami-proof, of course. It's more like a recognition that they have adopted all possible measures to mitigate tsunami risks. So authorities are helping communities to prepare themselves by installing evacuation signs, establishing security procedures, and creating plans to warn tourists. Like Spain, which distributed tsunami warning signs along the entire coastline, as well as signs showing evacuation routes to higher ground. And Spain better be prepared. I mean, only 7 tsunamis have hit the country since the year 365, so it's difficult to predict the effects of such an event. But they could be devastating, considering that Spanish coastal areas are so economically important. There's also a danger zone in the Averroes Fault, beneath the Barents Sea. If an earthquake happens at this point, people will have only 21 minutes to escape a tsunami. UNESCO has also established 12 tsunami warning centers, which cover Europe as well. This initiative involves 5 centers located in the Mediterranean and Northeast Atlantic regions. These centers can save thousands of lives because they monitor ocean disturbances 24/7. Then, after analyzing the threat, they send out messages based on the event's potential to cause a tsunami. The intensity scale ranges from no effect to completely devastating. And by that, they understand that nearly all brick buildings could be demolished by waves, and even the most reinforced concrete structures could suffer heavy damage. Now, so far, we have mostly talked about tsunamis caused by earthquakes along converging tectonic plate boundaries. In fact, earthquakes have accounted for over 80% of tsunamis since 1900. But tsunamis can also result from landslides, volcanic eruptions, and even meteorite impacts. Experts are also worried that with the current changes in climate, we might see more of meteotsunamis popping up in the Mediterranean. These ones are triggered by freaky weather conditions and can mess with any coastline that's got a shallow seafloor. They might not be as huge or famous as the earthquakes ones, but they can still cause significant property damage and put people in danger. For instance, in 2006, a meteotsunami struck the harbor of Ciutadella on the Spanish island of Menorca. Yachts were tossed into each other and later stranded on the harbor floor as the water receded. resulting in tens of millions of euros in damage. Unfortunately, meteo tsunamis in the Mediterranean tend to be stronger during summer, so if you're planning to spend your vacation in Europe, stay alert for any signs of dangerous waves. If you suddenly encounter a tsunami moving in your direction, remember this is the time to react. Move to higher ground as far inland as possible. Pay special attention to any emergency alerts and information, and follow the guidance of local authorities. Most importantly, do not wait around taking photos. Leave the area as soon as you notice any signs of this danger event or if you hear an official tsunami warning. Hey, stay safe. Sandy Island is a creepy landmass that appeared on world maps for nearly 200 years before vanishing into thin air. Located in the South Pacific between Australia and New Caledonia, this phantom island was first documented by explorers in the 18th century and continued to pop up on maps and even scientific surveys. But when a research ship sailed through its supposed coordinates in 2012, they found nothing but open water. They even measured the ocean depth at this spot, and it was always more than 4,000 feet deep, so there was no chance of a big piece of land could be hiding under the water. To make things even weirder, when you look up its exact coordinates on Google Earth, you'll still see a faint outline of what looks like a long, thin island, but with no landmass in sight. Theories about its disappearance talk about possible cartography errors, but the mystery of how a whole island fooled the world for centuries is still unsolved. Now, speaking of mysterious islands, let's dive into the enigma of Hashima Island. Located off the coast of Nagasaki, Japan, this small island was once a bustling coal mining facility, thriving with workers and families. But as the demand for coal declined, the island was abandoned in the 1970s, leaving behind a haunting ghost town. Today, Hashima stands eerily silent, with crumbling concrete buildings and overgrown vegetation. And if you are brave enough, you can do a virtual tour using Google Earth. But there are other places where digital maps won't let you see much, like the Ward Islands in Australia. If you search for its coordinates, you'll notice a bunch of blackout spots near the coast. This has led to all sorts of wild speculation online, sparking curiosity about what might be hidden beneath the surface. I mean, is it just a glitch, or could there really be some unusual wildlife down there? Well, we still don't have concrete answers for these obscured areas, but it is worth mentioning that this region is part of a wilderness protection area. This place is an important zone for the Australian sea lion and the New Zealand fur seal, for example. So, these blackout spots could be just part of a plan to keep everything private and protected out there. From creepy islands to abandoned places, if you ever find yourself driving through Rio de Janeiro, you might catch a glimpse of something unsettling: a group of creepy Santas, faded candy canes, and rusty slides surrounded by palm trees and dense greenery. This is Parque Aba Noel, an eerie, abandoned Christmas-themed amusement park in Brazil. The park's creator had big dreams, thinking it would become a massive, eclectic attraction with different themed areas. We're talking about a space the size of 460 football fields. Work started in 2000, but the place shut down a few years later after the creator tragically passed away in a car accident just meters from the park's entrance. Today, the attractions are slowly being taken over by rust. This totally feels like something out of a sci-fi movie, but those multicolored rings are actually right here on Earth, in Yellowstone National Park to be exact. At 370 feet in diameter, it is the largest hot spring in the United States and the third largest in the world. When you see it from above, the different colors come from various types of bacteria that act like real-life thermographic filters. Each type of bacteria thrives at different temperatures, and their colors reflect the heat levels in different parts of the spring. Our next stop is in Italy, where you can find the Villa de Vecchi, also known as the Red House or the Ghost Mansion. For every ghost mansion, there's an urban legend behind it. Now, while nothing we're about to say is confirmed, the tale is still pretty interesting and downright bizarre. Built in the mid-19th century by Count Felix de Vecchi, This once grand summer residence quickly became the site of tragedy. The Count's wife passed away under mysterious circumstances, and his daughter disappeared, never to be seen again. Devastated, the Count is said to have spent his remaining days searching for answers. Over the years, the mansion fell into ruin, with local legends adding to its haunted reputation. Some claim to hear strange noises or see ghostly figures, while others whisper about unusual rituals that might have taken place there. Though crumbling and overgrown, Villa de Vecchi remains popular for those intrigued by its eerie history. While we've explored eerie and abandoned human-made structures, let's take a look at a place where nature's forces left their own massive mark: the Meteor Crater in Arizona. The site was formed in an instant about 50,000 years ago, when a large iron-nickel meteorite slammed into Earth. Measuring just under a mile wide and 560 feet deep, the crater is one of the best-preserved impact sites in the world. Standing at its edge, you can almost picture the incredible force of the impact, wiping out everything around it. Today, the meteor crater is a fascinating geological landmark, drawing in scientists and curious visitors. From a Google Earth point of view, this area in Niger looks creepy, and what seems to be clusters of glass domes dotting the landscape, almost like an interplanetary colony. But in reality, it's kind of an illusion. Those domes are actually small semicircular pits, and they're part of the Just Dig It project. Can you dig it? These pits, known as water buns or earth smiles, are dug to capture rainwater and restore dry, degraded land. It's a simple but genius method that helps bring life back to areas suffering from desertification. By trapping water, these buns allow vegetation to grow again, cooling the land and reviving ecosystems. Now, you have probably heard of the famous Nazca lines in Peru, right? We're talking about those massive ancient geoglyphs carved into the desert, which have shapes like a spider, a monkey, and a hummingbird. Well, recently, something similar popped up, and it's got the internet buzzing. This new figure, located at the top of a mountain, looks a lot like a wild boar. While it's super cool to find a potential new geoglyph, the lack of solid info and the not-so-sharp edges make us think it's just a natural formation. It's still pretty intriguing, though. But if you head down south to Chile, that's where you'll actually find a real geoglyph. We're talking about the Atacama Giant, which is around 390 feet tall. What looks like a funny drawing seems to represent some sort of spiritual figure or deity. There's no solid proof of what it actually means, but experts believe this design might have worked as an early astronomical calendar. The points on the top and sides of the head are said to indicate the seasons based on how they align with the moon. Meanwhile, you might also find some mysterious shipwrecks while exploring Google Earth, like the MV Plassey in Ireland. This ship met its tragic fate back in 1960, when a heavy storm and strong winds blew it ashore at Finnis Rock, tearing a hole in the vessel's bottom. Water started rushing in from underneath. After some shouting and running in all directions, the crew managed to get out of the ship. Today, the vessel's remains are still at Finnis Rock and have become a popular attraction. You can still see its hull, which keeps falling apart over time, making the whole scene even creepier. And we've also got something interesting involving the Titanic. Now, it's true that the ship is really 13,000 feet underwater, so you actually can't see it with satellite cameras. But if you type these coordinates into Google Earth, you'll find the spot of the Titanic accident. It's not that creepy of a place. I mean, it's really just a huge expanse of blue. But still, it's pretty interesting to get the big picture of how they seem so far from everything on that tragic night when the ship went down.
There's a stretch of water that even the most experienced explorers fear. No matter what season you choose to cross it in, you risk meeting face-to-face with waves that can reach as tall as the Hollywood sign. I'm talking about the Drake Passage, the waterway connecting the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, stretching from Cape Horn at South America's southernmost tip to Antarctica's South Shetland Islands. It's about as wide as the distance from London to Berlin and takes up to 48 hours to cross. Some sailors compare getting on the other side to going to the moon. That's how challenging it is. Even the man who discovered it, Sir Francis Drake, never sailed these waters because they seemed too dangerous to him and opted for a calmer, although longer, Strait of Magellan. The passage took the lives of around 20,000 sailors and over 800 ships. Tourists who want to see Antarctica cross the Drake Passage on a regular basis, although it's still often called the world's most terrifying ocean crossing. The Antarctic Peninsula, where travelers go, isn't really part of Antarctica itself. It sticks out and points towards South America like two fingers almost touching it. The water gets squeezed between these two land masses, making strong ocean currents. The passage is part of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the largest ocean current on Earth. The water rushes through the passage at a speed between 95 and 150 million cubic meters per second, which makes it rougher. And then there are winds that usually blow from west to east and are very strong between 40 and 60 degrees latitude. That's why those areas are called the Roaring Forties, Furious 50s, and Screaming 60s. Land slows down winds, which is why storms hitting Ireland and the UK get weaker as they move east. But Drake's latitude is the only place where winds can blow all around the Earth without being stopped by land. So they keep getting faster. These strong winds turn into huge waves that can hit ships really hard, normally around 13 to 16 feet tall. They're much higher than waves in the Atlantic. Drake Passage also has underwater mountains that you can't see. The huge current squeezes through this narrow passage and causes waves to crash against these mountains underwater. These internal waves create whirls that bring cold water up from the deep ocean. So it's not just rough on the surface, the water is wild all the way down. The first sailor managed to sail around Cape Horn and through the Drake Passage in 1616. It was a Dutch navigator, Willem Schouten, in 1616. But the most famous attempt to cross it was undertaken by Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton on his ship named Endurance. He and 27 of his men set off from South Georgia, aiming to reach Vassal Bay in Antarctica. But things didn't go as planned. On January 19, 1915, their ship got stuck in the ice. And by October, it began to sink. They camped on floating ice for 2 months before sailing lifeboats to a remote, icy place called Elephant Island. Shackleton and 5 men made a risky journey to South Georgia to get help. It took them 15 days to cross Drake Passage with hurricane winds. Finally, they arrived safely and organized a rescue for the rest of their crew. Scientists found the shipwreck of Endurance only in 2022, 10,000 feet below the water. In December of 2019, 6 fearless athletes decided to cross the Drake Passage by rowing a boat for the first time in history. It took them 12 days of non-stop rowing with a 90-minute rotation of rowers. They managed to do it, and it was probably the hardest possible way to cross the passage. The athletes mentioned it was cold, wet, and dirty, and the waves hit them like walls. The weather in the Drake Passage changes a lot, but ship captains can always see it coming and change their path. They will move the departure time to have a safety margin and not to get stuck in the middle of the passage in the worst possible conditions. Sometimes, the journey will be smooth and calm, and they call it Drake Lake. Other times, people on the ship will feel rough waves, which is called Drake Shake. Some experienced captains who often cross the passage say that the Drake Lake effect happens once in every 10 crossings, and they see the Drake Shake once or twice in every 10 journeys. A schooner or a kayak will probably not survive the journey among giant waves, but modest vessels and cruise ships have sturdy hulls and advanced stabilizing mechanisms. So, the journey isn't that dangerous anymore, but still, it's quite an adventure, especially if you're seasick. If you don't feel like risking it but want to travel from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean by water the fast way, the Panama Canal is waiting for you. People first started thinking about making a water path across Panama in the 16th century. Back then, a Spanish explorer found out that only a thin piece of land separated the two oceans. But it seemed impossible to build it because of the mountains and thick jungle, so the idea had to wait a couple of centuries. Finally, in 1880, France, led by the man who built the Suez Canal in Egypt, tried to make the canal. But the people who started the construction soon found out it was much harder than it looked on a map. The land in Panama was one of the toughest and most dangerous places to dig a big waterway. Workers had to literally move huge mountains in a jungle full of snakes, where it was really hot and rainy. During the wet season, heavy rain turned rivers into wild rapids and soaked the workers. Sometimes, they didn't see the sun for 2 weeks, and their clothes stayed wet all the time. Big rocks were falling, and tiny mosquitoes that carried malaria made people very sick. And then, an earthquake happened on top of everything. They were losing thousands of people. That's why France decided to abandon the project after 7 years. Then, the United States bought the French assets in the canal zone and finished it by 1914. It cost the US around $375 million. The 50-mile-long passage of water saves ships traveling between New York and San Francisco 7,872 miles. Around 14,000 ships use it every year and pay around $1.8 million in tolls. So it looks like it all paid off. Another challenging waterway in this part of the world is the Amazon River. It's around 4,300 miles long and flows through 3 countries with over 30 million people living in its basin. But there isn't a single bridge across it. The river has many marshes and soft soils, so engineers would need to build very long bridges and very deep foundations, which costs a lot of money. Building bridges over deep water is tough, but in other places in the world, engineers can use things like floating platforms to help. The river's path and water levels change a lot during the year. During the dry season from June to November, the river is usually 2 to 6 miles wide. But in the wet season from December to April, the river can become as wide as 30 miles. And the water level can rise by 50 feet. That's why they can't build floating bridges or pontoons. The riverbanks are made of soft dirt that moves and erodes with the seasons, and it makes things even harder. It would have to be an absolutely unique project to overcome all these challenges. Luckily, there's no pressing need for a bridge across the Amazon right now. The river mostly goes through areas that are sparsely populated, so there aren't so many major roads to be connected by bridges.
Welcome to the Spirit of Discovery cruise ship, which will take you on an unforgettable sea voyage around the Canary Islands. The azure endless ocean, delicious food, the highest service, premium cabins, and a terrible nightmare that you will probably remember for the rest of your life. This is exactly how one luxury trip of the Saga Cruises Company ended last year. Instead of relaxing during the cruise, passengers felt fear and horror, and even had health problems. And that's why. On October 24th, the Spirit of Discovery liner started a 2-week cruise around the Canary Islands. There were about 1,500 people on board. About 1,000 were passengers, and the rest were crew members. The first week went great, but then the liner encountered a serious problem called nature. There were strong winds and big waves. The captain decided to return to the UK ahead of time, but the decision was made too late. The ship was caught in a severe storm in the Bay of Biscay. A powerful wind with a force of 11 points hit the vessel. To make it easier for you to understand, the 11-point wind is able to tear out trees together with roots, destroy residential buildings, and plunge entire cities into chaos. Such a storm is rare, but Spirit of Discovery was unlucky enough to get into its epicenter. 11 points is the penultimate place on the Beaufort scale, which determines the wind rating. The most powerful storm has 12 points, and this is a hurricane. The wind reached a speed of 65 miles per hour, which is about the same as the average speed of a car on a highway. Not only did it push the Spirit of Discovery, but it also raised huge waves 25 feet high. Just imagine a wall of water the height of a 3-story building collapsing on a lone ocean liner. At that moment, the captain sent a message to all the passengers through the cabin speakers so that no one left their place. And his voice sounded worried enough. All the passengers had to lie down and hold on tight. According to the witnesses' words, the ship remained caught in the storm for about 15 hours. They held on with all their might so as not to crash into the walls and floor. All this time, tables were flying around the ship, dishes were breaking, furniture was moving all over the cabins. The waves smashed windows, partitions, and doors. Some people were knocked down because they couldn't hold on for so long. The storm hurled the passengers from ceiling to floor, from wall to wall. The ship's crew turned the dining room into a medical area to provide assistance to those who had been hurt. Despite the difficult and terrible conditions, the ship's team did a great job. They regularly informed passengers about the current situation and tried to calm everyone down. There was no panic and chaos on board. When the storm finally ended, the ship continued its journey and finally reached land, where medics urgently evacuated 8 passengers to the hospital. One of them was never able to survive this storm. It's good the ship didn't meet a rogue wave during the storm. This is a natural phenomenon that can appear during a storm and even in still water. It's a giant wave with a height of 60 feet. Like a 6-story house, it collapses onto a ship with incredible speed and capsizes it. And then the wave suddenly disappears. This is no joke. A similar wave has been recorded in the Gulf Stream off of Charleston, South Carolina. It's scary to get in its way. Now, let's go back to the past to remember one of the most terrible maritime tragedies. No, we're not talking about the Titanic. We'll talk about the Greek liner Laconia, which set sail from the English port of Southampton on December 19, 1963, with more than 600 people on board. However, just 3 days later, a terrible tragedy happened to the ship in the boundless waters of the Atlantic. At 11 p.m., in the barbershop hall, an electrical malfunction occurred. The problem led to a fire, which quickly spread to other rooms. The crew couldn't cope with it, since the fire was spreading too fast. The ship's team turned on the fire alarm, but there was no command to leave the vessel. Only 2 hours later, the captain ordered the passengers to evacuate. All this time, people were either relaxing in their cabins or enjoying a party in the ballroom. The crew was probably trying to put out the fire without causing panic. However, when the situation became critical, the evacuation began. People panicked and ran to the lifeboats, but many didn't manage to get inside. One of them was John Morris. He survived this catastrophe and shared his memories of how he put his family in a lifeboat while he stayed on board the ship. He didn't even have a life jacket. Since there was nowhere to go, the ship's crew opened a bar so that people could relax a little. However, at that moment, boilers began to explode inside the ship, and it became clear the vessel wouldn't stay afloat for too long. John Morris decided to jump into the water right in his tuxedo. As soon as he was overboard, he grabbed onto a piece of wooden deck cargo and swam as far away from the ship as he could. The giant liner could sink at any moment, and when such a huge object goes down to the seabed, it forms a water funnel that pulls along everything around. Rescuers arrived at the scene sometime later. Fortunately, John Morris's pregnant wife and young son were alive, but his mother-in-law unfortunately didn't survive the disaster, like many other people that day. Of course, after this incident, the Greek Ministry of Merchant Marine initiated a thorough investigation. For 2 years, they collected information from passengers and the captain, studied the technical characteristics of the ship, and eventually came to certain conclusions. According to them, the ship's crew gave the evacuation order too late. Not all passengers were able to get into lifeboats, but half of those boats remained on board because of the chaos that prevailed during the evacuation. Several officers of the liner were accused of negligence, but the captain and his first mate received the most criticism. As for John Morris, he stated that he felt himself under protection that day. Another unusual story happened on a cruise ship relatively recently. Spoiler alert, The ship didn't sink, there was no evacuation, and the weather was good. However, for many passengers, this journey became a real challenge. Imagine that you've been working for a long time and saving up money to go on your dream trip on the Celebrity Mercury cruise ship in the Caribbean. You arrive in South Carolina, from where the ship begins its journey. You get on board, looking forward to a week's rest. At first, everything is fine. People are having fun, chefs are cooking delicious dishes, and beautiful daytime landscapes turn into night parties. But then suddenly, many passengers start throwing up. Someone is in a hurry to go to the toilet, and someone stays and vomits right in the halls. The cruise turns into chaos. More and more people feel terrible because of unknown poisoning. You also visited the restaurant and eaten seafood, but fortunately, the disease has avoided you, which can't be said for more than 400 other passengers. Almost every 1 in 4 people on board face gastrointestinal problems. There were almost 2,000 people, and a quarter of them are in bad condition. Crew members do endless cleaning. They wash the deck, give people nausea pills, and ask them not to leave the cabin till the illness passes. The captain sends several samples ashore to determine what caused the poisoning. Unfortunately, the cruise is already ruined, and all the passengers have unpleasant memories. So the company organizing the trip issues certificates that can be used on future cruises. It's not the most pleasant experience, but it's still better than nothing. Now, imagine if, instead of just feeling sick, people got infected with some kind of bacterium that would turn them into zombies. It would be much more exciting and scary. Now, do you think you could survive on such a ship full of zombies? And how would you do that? Tell me about it in the comments.
A ship is traveling across the Atlantic Ocean when a storm starts. At first, the situation doesn't seem to be very bad, but soon, people on board the ship realize that the storm is intensifying. Waves are huge, and nothing can save the ship. It's starting to sink. On board, there's only one lifeboat. Sadly, it can only hold one person. The captain is in a terrible situation. He needs to decide which passenger can be given a chance to survive. Besides the captain, there are 8 people on board. Some of them seem to be lovely, others look like villains. But you might not know the truth until it's too late. The first passenger is Alex, a 28-year-old talented artist. He's just had his first international exhibition and is boasting about that left and right. He claims to dream of inspiring the world with his art, but did I mention it's his shy twin brother who painted those masterpieces? And Alex just steals his shine? Next is 23-year-old Maria, who's 8 months pregnant. She's quite spoiled, often behaves unreasonably, and treats the staff on board badly. She's traveling home to her husband, but little does he know that the kid is not his, but his best friend's. And she's been cheating on him since forever. Though we can't let this innocent soul perish, can we? Despite his untidy appearance, this 65-year-old scientist, Professor Marcus, is a leading researcher in the field of gene therapy. He's working on a breakthrough that could save millions of lives, but there are skeletons in his closet too. It's been 15 years since anyone saw his wife, Judith. Does Marcus's scientific progress have something to do with the mysterious disappearance of his wife? Dr. Anna is 34 years old. She's a surgeon who's saved hundreds of lives during natural disasters. She succeeded as a doctor, but failed as a parent. Her 3 daughters live with their dad and don't want to hear anything about their mother. 78-year-old Teresa is a widow whose family gave up on her because of her bad temper. She's traveling for the last time in her life to visit her late husband's grave. A little boy, Mark, is just 7 years old, but his unruly character has caused a lot of arguments between the other passengers. He's traveling alone since his parents are supposed to meet him on the shore. This brat's parents are too busy working, so he gets more and more uncontrollable. Who knows what he'll be capable of doing in 10 years or so? A robot android, Alpha 3, is also on board the ship. It has an artificial intelligence created to assist in expeditions. It can also control the ship in emergency cases. And the last passenger is Emily. This beautiful and charming woman is 30 years old. She lives off of powerful, old, rich men and has enough money to burn. She hasn't worked a single day in her entire life and just travels the world. To make his choice, the captain invites each of the passengers to listen to their stories. He asks each of them just one question. Why would you be the one to survive? Alex says, "You see, my art can inspire and change the world. Looking at my works, they help people see the beauty of life, especially during difficult times. I must continue living. I have so much to show through my paintings." Maria answers, "Can't you see that a new life is growing inside my body? It's me and my unborn kid who must survive. We risk losing a talented doctor or an artist in the future. It's not just my life we're talking about." Professor Marcus says, "My work is not finished yet. It might save thousands of lives. I'm close to a breakthrough and I need to live to make it." Dr. Anna says, "My hands save lives. I have proven many times that I can do the impossible in extreme conditions. The world can't lose my skills and knowledge." The elderly woman begs,
"Please, you must understand me. I might have lived a long life, but I want to see my husband's grave."
Mark says,
"I'm still a kid. My parents are waiting for me at home. I want to hug my mom and dad."
Alpha 3 states that it was created to serve and help people. Its ability to analyze situations and make rational decisions in a crisis can be used to prevent future disasters. Emily admits,
"Look at me. Doesn't every person have their unique value? I'm young and beautiful, and I have a lot of potential. Surely you see it."
the captain is desperate. How can he, a mere mortal, decide who should live and who he should take this chance away from? After pacing his cabin and hitting the walls with his fists, he decides to estimate passengers' value and see how useful they are. Alex, as a talented artist, can influence society through his art, providing inspiration for thousands of people who will see his masterpieces. But no one knows where his ego can bring him. Plus, remember who the real artist is. Saving Maria means saving her unborn child. But however cynical it may sound, the contribution of these two lives to the future of society is assumed, but not guaranteed. What if that child grows up to become a criminal? Professor Marcus can indeed provide significant benefits to society through his scientific research, but he isn't young. What if he doesn't live long enough to finish his work? Dr. Anna is a surgeon. She's already saved a lot of lives and will definitely continue to do so in the future. Her ability to provide immediate medical assistance in critical situations makes her one of the most valuable candidates for survival, since she can directly and regularly save lives. At the same time, she is a terrible mother, and it'll definitely influence the lives of her daughters. Teresa is living history and experience, but unfortunately, her ability to continue contributing to society is limited. In simple words, she's old, and we don't know how much time she has left. Mark is in a similar situation. He has the potential for a long and productive life, but his immediate contribution to society is limited. His survival is based on the potential for future contribution, which is difficult to estimate at the moment. Alpha 3 can provide valuable technical assistance and functional support, but as a robot, it does not add to human well-being directly. As for Emily, despite her beauty, her achievements are minimal. On the other hand, she's only dating wealthy and influential people, and thus has a lot of influence on society of her own. Now, from the perspective of how much profit each of the passengers can bring, saving Dr. Anna seems to be one of the most logical choices. Her knowledge and skills can save many lives in the future, which means the greatest good for the greatest number. But let's have a look at the captain's choice. In the end, after listening to all the passengers and pressed for time, the man decides to save Emily. Can you figure out why he's made such an unexpected choice? Write your answer in the comments below. You can also pause the video to think it over. Okay, I suppose you're ready for the answer to be revealed. You see, even though each passenger presented very compelling arguments for why they should be saved, the captain was particularly moved by Emily's charm and attractiveness. And even though there were more logical candidates in terms of utilitarianism and humanism, the captain succumbed to his personal feelings and preferences, which influenced his decision. This riddle illustrates that in real life, people often make choices based on their sympathies and preferences rather than logic or public benefit. This is because emotions and personal relationships can have a strong influence on our perception of situations and decision-making. Here's a real-life example. HR managers tend to choose candidates they like or share common interests with, and it doesn't matter that other candidates might have more suitable skills or experience. This phenomenon is known as the similarity effect. Now, I've got an important question for you. Which passenger would you save? Share your choice in the comments. But I'd like to remind you that there is no correct answer. The concrete of gigantic construction is cracking, barely keeping thousands of tons of water under control. That's when a tiny quake shakes the ground. It becomes a game changer. The old dam gives up. An enormous amount of water dashes through the rapidly growing ruptures, pressing on the crumbling wall of stone. Another moment, and the huge dam disappears among powerful waterfalls rushing toward the village down in the valley. When a large dam hits 50 years old, it reaches its alert age. But it's basically a warning that maintaining the dam is going to get much harder, and the risk factor starts going up. A recent study by the UN Institute for Water, Environment and Health discovered that the UK and Japan have the most dams in this alert age category. No wonder. In both countries, the average dam is over 100 years old. If you, like me, are wondering why so many dams are getting old at the same time, the answer is pretty simple. Back in the middle of the 20th century, there was a massive dam building boom. In the late 1950s through the 1970s, countries built over 1,100 dams every year. But after 1990, the construction frenzy slowed down. No more than 500 new dams appeared every year, and since 2000, this number has dropped even more, to below 300. But the huge problem is that many of the dams built during that mid-century boom are all aging at the same time. And a lot of countries are facing infrastructure problems at the moment. Because what happens when these dams get too old? If they're not maintained, they're likely to start to fail, and that's a real disaster, both for water supplies and safety. It's like a ginormous water-based game of Jenga. And like in the real thing, we need to make sure those pieces don't fall. A disaster like the one we're talking about happened to the Bancha'a Dam built in 1952. This structure collapsed in 1975 after catastrophic rains from Typhoon Nina, leading to the loss of up to 240,000 lives. One of the reasons was the dam's poor design. It wasn't built to withstand extreme conditions. So, when the region faced unprecedented downpours, the dam overflowed and collapsed. I bet you're now super eager to know whether that dam near your home is going to fail. Well, if you find it on our list of the world's most dangerous dams, maybe it's time to relocate. The Hoover Dam is one of the highest dams in the USA, standing on the Colorado River at the border between Nevada and Arizona. Towering at over 726 feet, it's a stunning sight, as well as a powerhouse of energy. Its base is as thick as 2 soccer fields are long, and each spillway can handle the volume of water that flows over Niagara Falls. But experts warn that if the gigantic Hoover Dam breaks down, it'll most likely lead to catastrophic consequences, putting millions of lives at risk. The problem is, the dam is getting old. Plus, it's located in a seismically active area. The Almendra Dam is the highest dam in Spain. It was constructed between 1963 and 1970, and its main purpose is to control the flow of the river Tormes. This dam is no joke. Just a small manipulation could unleash a wave of destruction. So it's actually a serious concern for those living downstream. The Jinping Dam, often referred to as the Jinping First Cascade, is the tallest dam in the world. Its height is 1,001 feet. You'll find it in China. It was constructed to regulate the flow of the Yelong River. This structure carries immense responsibility, producing between 16 and 18 billion kilowatt hours annually. The average U.S. household consumes about 11,000 kilowatt hours per year. It means that the energy produced by the Jinping hydropower station is enough to supply around 1.6 million households. The Kariba Dam is a colossal structure built on the Zambezi River between Zambia and Zimbabwe. Multiple authorities carry out its maintenance, but according to reports, if repairs are not conducted as soon as possible, the dam could lead to terrible destruction in the surrounding regions. It's crucial to keep an eye on this giant. The Mosul Dam is one of the most dangerous dams in the world. It's constructed of loose mud instead of concrete. This design mishap has led to ongoing erosion. The mud gets washed away by the river slowly and steadily. People work around the clock to repair and maintain the dam, but it's still a crucial site of concern. The Idukki Dam, located in Kerala, India, is a magnificent double curvature arch dam standing on the Periyar River. It's one of the highest arch dams in Asia, and it holds a huge volume of water. If a problem occurs at this dam, the consequences will be tragic for large areas. Such a disaster is likely to wipe out countless lives. So, the upkeep of the dam is crucial for everyone's safety. The Three Gorges Dam in China is one of the largest dams in the world and the world's biggest hydroelectric power station, completed in 2012. The dam is nearly 600 feet tall and stretches for 7,660 feet. That's more than half the width of Manhattan. The construction is so huge and powerful that experts say it's even had serious impacts on Earth itself. For example, affecting the rotation of our planet. However great it is, this dam poses a serious risk to the environment and safety. For one thing, it was built in an earthquake-prone area. Yikes. Plus, sediment buildup in the reservoir might make the construction less stable. Also, when they were building this dam, they had to relocate over 1 million people and significantly change the ecosystem. Famous for its beauty, the Monticello Dam in the USA attracts thousands of visitors each year. One of the reasons people are so eager to come there is its captivating glory hole. Indeed, at first sight, it may look like a picturesque feature. But in reality, this glory hole is actually a doorway to danger. It's basically a giant concrete funnel sticking up out of the dam. When the lake's surface level rises over 440 feet above sea level, which is close to overflowing the dam, the water starts draining out through the funnel as if from a bathtub. It creates a hypnotizing swirl, but you wouldn't want to get too close and get lost in the process. Nestled on the Columbia River in Washington, the Grand Coulee Dam has been powering the Pacific Northwest since 1942. It contains nearly 12 million cubic yards of concrete, which is enough to build a sidewalk 4 feet wide and 4 inches thick and wrap it twice around the equator. But this magnificent structure has some worries too. It's an aging structure, and at over 80 years old, it needs lots of TLC. It's located in a seismically active zone, which brings its stability into question. The Kurobe Dam in Japan is a stunning 610 feet tall. It was finished in 1963, so the structure is already pretty old. Japan's earthquakes makes this dam a bit nervous too. And last but not least, the area is prone to heavy rainfall. Intense rain might put extra pressure on the structure. On the Indus River, the Tarbela Dam is the largest earth-filled dam in the world. It was completed in 1976. Its issues include sediment buildup, which reduces its storage capacity. Plus, climate change has altered water flow, threatening the stability of the dam. The main reason we build dams is for irrigation. They help get water to our crops, and a whopping 40% of the food we eat around the globe depends on these big water-holding structures. Next on the list is hydropower. Dams are like giant batteries, turning flowing water into electricity. Then we have water supply, flood control, and even such fun activities as boating and fishing. But since dams are getting older, something needs to be done to protect people living close to them. The US is leading the way in something called dam removal, having taken down more than 1,200 dams in the last 30 years. Old dams are not only risky, but also expensive to maintain, so taking them down is often the smartest and cheapest move. There's something really bizarre going on at these 12 points scattered across the Earth. The vile vortices, as they're called, are these creepy spots over the Tropic of Cancer, the Tropic of Capricorn, and the North and South Poles, where weird forces seem to take over. You've probably heard of the most famous one, the Bermuda Triangle. It's believed that more than 50 ships and 20 airplanes have mysteriously disappeared in this area, which is located between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. But what most people don't realize is that the Bermuda Triangle actually has 11 siblings, and these other spots can be even more terrifying. Let's start with Mohenjo-Daro. This was a thriving city located in what is now Pakistan. Built around 2500 before the Common Era, this urban center was once home to about 40,000 people. But then, suddenly, people abandoned it by the year 1700 before the Common Era. In the 1940s, an archaeologist discovered 39 human skeletons at the site, which fueled the theory that the city was invaded by some other civilization at some point. But honestly, it's hard to confirm that, since archaeology doesn't really explain the city's sudden destruction or the disappearance of its people. It's led to a bunch of bizarre theories. One of them talks about an ancient extraterrestrial race that might have lived there, and a malevolent wind that swept through the city. Another ancient city with a similar mystery is the Great Zimbabwe. Its construction began in the 11th century, and at its peak it housed up to 18,000 people. But for reasons we'll probably never fully understand, it was abandoned in the 15th century. Archaeologists were really interested in this place, and that's when things got even weirder. They found 8 of these birds, now called the Zimbabwe birds. These soapstone sculptures were found sitting on stone columns that were over 90 centimeters tall. Nothing like them has ever been found anywhere else, and their meaning is still a total mystery. Some think each bird represents a new king, but other theories suggest they were ancient animals very dear to the people who lived there. Adding to the mystery, local legends talk about a strange, short man who's sometimes seen wandering around, but he always disappears before anyone can get close. Then there's Easter Island, another one of the 12 vile vortices. It's located in the eastern Pacific Ocean, and it's famous for its nearly 1,000 enormous statues called moai. We still don't know what they mean, or how they were made. Some of them are almost 30 feet tall and weigh as much as 80 tons. Today, it wouldn't be that tough to move and carve these statues, but we're talking about a period between the years 1100 and 1680. So nobody really knows how they did it. Some specialists believe these statues were carried across the island, while others think they were pushed on log rollers. But the most bizarre theories suggest extraterrestrials were involved. Algeria is another land rich in ancient mysteries, and one of the most fascinating is something called the Jeddars. These are 13 monuments with square stone bases and angular mounds, built between the 4th and 7th centuries. But the weird part is, no one knows their purpose. One of them had an inscription in Latin, but it was so worn down that the message was nearly impossible to read. The best guess so far is that these monuments were probably tombs for royalty, although no one knows exactly who was supposed to be buried there. What we do know is that there are many myths related to strange disappearances in the region. The next mysterious spot is located south of Tokyo in the Pacific Ocean, and it's called the Dragon's Triangle. Does that name ring a bell? Yep. Just like the Bermuda Triangle, this area is known for strange disappearances of airplanes and ships. One of the most chilling stories dates back to 1945, when a plane allegedly vanished. The pilot supposedly sent a radio transmission right before the aircraft disappeared, claiming that something strange was happening in the sky, like it was opening up or something. While this story is definitely eerie, the truth behind it and many other Dragon's Triangle legends is still up for debate. If you type Hamakulia volcano into Google Earth, you'll find it located in Hawaii's Ring of Fire. But this place is so shrouded in mystery that it's hard to find much information about it. Some legends speak of unusual electrical energy being detected in the area, and there's even a story about an eyewitness who claimed to see a plane flying over it totally disappear from the radar. Another eerie spot is the South Atlantic Anomaly, which is an area on Earth where natural radiation flows out of control. While this doesn't affect our daily lives on the surface, it has a pretty big impact on Earth's atmosphere. The radiation there is so intense that it can knock out the onboard computers of spacecraft and interfere with the data collected by satellites passing through the area. To deal with this, specialists had to add an additional shield to the International Space Station. The South Atlantic Anomaly is also linked to a weird event that astronauts experience called cosmic ray visual phenomena. They've reported seeing random flashes of light or shooting stars out there in space, but it's all just some kind of illusion. From wild radiation to strange seismic activity. The Wharton Basin in the Indian Ocean is a place known for unusual tectonic events. In April of 2012, a massive earthquake measuring magnitude 8.6 hit the region. This was considered the largest intraplate earthquake ever recorded, meaning it happened within a tectonic plate rather than at its boundary. This caught the attention of scientists, who now speculate that the region might be forming a new boundary between the Australian and Indian plates. But for now, this is all still one big mystery. Now let's head to the Pacific Ocean. More specifically, to the New Hebrides Trench. This submarine trench is about 750 miles long and 45 miles wide. It formed when the Australian plate slid under the New Hebrides plate. There's no doubt that this is one of the creepiest and deepest spots in the ocean. The danger isn't just down in the deep sea either, as this trench has been connected to several earthquakes that affected New Caledonia and Vanuatu. This area also has some strange features. For example, when scientists explored it, they didn't find a single grenadier fish down there. This type of fish is one of the most common deep-sea creatures you would expect to see in trenches around the Pacific. So why aren't they around the New Hebrides Trench? Maybe they know something we don't. The two remaining vile vortices are the North and South Poles. These two are on the opposite ends of the planet, but they share one thing in common: strange disappearances. One of the most famous stories from the North Pole happened in 1897. 3 brave explorers set out on a journey to reach the North Pole using a hot air balloon. But they never completed their mission. Their mysterious disappearance remains one of the most intriguing, unsolved mysteries in the history of Arctic exploration. The South Pole is also known for similar mysteries. It's believed that hundreds of people may be buried beneath the snow and ice of the coldest continent on Earth. Even with all the advancements in technology and knowledge, the South Pole can still be extremely dangerous for anyone who ventures there. The temperatures can drop to almost minus 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and the winds can get up to 200 miles per hour. And that's definitely enough reason to stay away. Now that you're familiar with the 12 vile vortices, let me tell you something even stranger. If you look at a map, you'll see that these places are arranged in a way that looks pretty similar across the globe. Here's the weird part. If you connect these spots where unexplained events have occurred, you actually form the geometric shape of an icosahedron. This could be just a huge coincidence, but the fact that these mystery spots align with this shape makes them even more intriguing.
The unsinkable Titanic didn't go down peacefully, which made finding its final resting place all the more difficult. The world-famous RMS Titanic sank in 1912, but was only discovered in 1985 on a secret mission. Although people back in the early 1900s had the approximate location of where the Titanic was, they didn't have the right technology to find it. As it went under, the ship sent several CQD signals, standing for Come Quickly, Distress, to a nearby ship named Carpathia. Come at once, we have struck a berg. It's a CQD, old man, were some of the final words transmitted from the Marconi wireless on the ship. These Morse code messages were also what made the first research missions to the wreck possible. RMS Carpathia found the lifeboats filled with Titanic survivors, but the world also desperately wanted to see what became of the famous liner. Fast forward to 1953. That's when the first serious attempt to find the Titanic wreck happened. A man named Risdon Beasley tried using a loud eruptive device to locate the ship. It sounds weird, but there's science to back it up. When dynamite goes off, the waves from the detonation hit the bottom of the ocean floor. With the help of sonars, scientists would be able to locate if there was anything solid at the bottom of the ocean. But Beasley had no luck. Another 20 years would pass before oceanographer Robert Ballard would make his attempt to locate the Titanic. Ballard had a bit more luck than Beasley. Over the previous years, underwater technology had gotten more funding and so worked much better. He tried it the first time in 1977. Ballard partnered with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution on a mission to map the ocean floor. While the institute hired him to test out their new mapping technology, Ballard's intention was to go a little further and find the Titanic wreck. In the middle of this new technological ship, there was a hole that allowed for a long pipe to be extended into the water just above the ocean floor. Attached to the end of this pipe, Ballard installed a pod with sonars and cameras. They thought they were in for something big, and so they took the ship to sea to run some tests. That's when, on a trial run, adversity struck. The drill pipe broke, sending all of their expensive material to the bottom of the ocean floor, just like the Titanic. When Ballard failed, another important character came into this story, a man named Jack Grimm, an eccentric oil tycoon. Grimm had become famous for trying to find things such as Noah's Ark, the Loch Ness Monster, and Bigfoot. He also tried to prove the hollow Earth theory, that says that the interior of Earth is entirely hollow and hosts underground cities and nations. His search consisted of trying to find a large hole on the North Pole, and thus venturing inside the hollow Earth. After his attempts failed, he set his eyes on the jewel liner that had sunk, the RMS Titanic. Grimm had the money, but he didn't have the know-how. So, as a billionaire, he made a big donation to Columbia University and asked in return to use some of their equipment. He hired a team of highly qualified scientists to help operate the machinery. Here's where it gets a little strange. Jack Grimm was a believer in folklore and non-conventional ways of doing things. So he brought a monkey on board and surprised the research team. This monkey, called Titan, was believed to point to a map and locate lost things. In this case, the Titanic. The scientists went crazy when the monkey appeared and told Grimm it was either them or the monkey. This expedition left Florida without Titan. Yes, there would be no monkey business. They set the course to the exact location of Titanic's last distress signal. They arrived, examined every inch of the ocean floor, but still found nothing. Grimm's first expedition lasted 3 weeks, but unfortunately, they found absolutely nothing. They tried a particularly good search method known as mowing the lawn, where they mimic such movements to map every inch of a larger area around Titanic's distress coordinates. The reasons for failure were important defects in the equipment and terrible weather. That's when that prior searcher of the lost Titanic came back into the picture, Robert Ballard. He didn't have the millions Jack Grimm had, but he had one thing going for him. The marine geologist was working closely with the U.S. Navy to locate 2 nuclear submarines which had sunk in the 1960s. Ballard himself says he was living 2 lives, one as a researcher and the other as a Navy intelligence officer. The deal was simple. He'd have a green light to search for the Titanic after he found the 2 missing submarines. To find Thresher and Scorpion, he used an unmanned submarine vehicle called Argo. Argo was like a little snow sled. It was attached to a bigger ship that sailed above the water. Argo was connected to the ship by a long cable, and it was piloted by a team on board. The sled had sonars and cameras that provided real-time imaging of the ocean floor, so it was a real advancement on other attempts. After much thinking, he had a eureka moment. He supposed the force of the wreck should have left a comet trail that led back to the ship. While searching for the Titanic, most people had tried to find the ship itself. But until then, it had been trying to find a needle in a haystack. That's why Ballard's logic was so brilliant. He needed to invert the order. He had another obstacle on his hands: time. He could only look for the ship after finding the lost subs. And by the time that happened, he had 12 days left. He teamed up with another scientist, and they applied the mowing the lawn method to map the ocean bed. Another important piece of information that most researchers left out was that there was a sea current moving south on the day of the disaster. This meant that the debris field should be south of the distress signal coordinates. To save time and resources, he would do a quick reconnaissance of the ocean floor, spacing lines more than 3 miles apart to look for debris fields. He also relied more on the camera visuals than on the sonar signals. His team took turns piloting Argo and watching the video. Days rolled by, with nothing but the empty ocean floor showing up. Until the rocks they were used to seeing started to look like man-made debris. Suddenly, there it was, the Titanic's boiler. Ballard was right. The debris field would take them back to the ship. After 73 years of searching, they had finally found the Titanic wreck.